earliest incarnations of these metaverses tend to, and the best ones, most highly populated ones, are game environments. They're not, you look at what's going on in some of these MMO games where millions of people are interacting, and there the interactions are game interactions. It changes things a little bit if we're playing a game, where your character is a thief and your game role is to try to steal things from people. Even if those things have real world translatable value, I'm not sure we should call what you did theft in terms of going down to the DA and reporting you and saying, well, John's thief character in this fantasy game stole my shield, and that shield's worth $100 on eBay. I want him put in jail in the real world for that. It starts creating some real fuzzy, weird lines about are you changing the rules when you go into these systems? And I think we're going to have to face that in the metaverse quite a bit.
Ed Cavazos, an attorney specializing in technology law, joins John and Scoop on this episode of the Plutopia podcast. We discuss censorship, social media monopolies, the right of publicity, the metaverse and the law, and much more.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Plutopia News Network podcast. Our guest today is Ed Cavazos. Ed is an attorney who's been focused for many years on the cutting edges of technology law. He manages the Austin office of Pillsbury, Winthrop, Shaw, Pittman. He negotiates complex technology-related transactions and routinely advises on corporate and general business matters, licensing, strategic partnerships, development contracts, data rights, and privacy issues. Well, I got tired just reading that. He represents internet, e-commerce, software, hardware, video game, and media /entertainment clients, and he litigates complex IP disputes, including patent, trade secret, copyright, trademark, contract breach, and internet-related claims. And I wanted to kind of read a fuller bio, Ed, so that everybody will understand the breadth of your knowledge. And then I'll mention that we've known each other since you were a student at UT in law school.
That's right.
At the time that we were both on the board of EFF Austin and involved with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and that you have continued to focus on the same issues we were focused on then. Of course, they've been evolving quite a bit, and I think that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be talking to you guys, and you're right. Really since law school, I've had the good fortune of my practice reflecting my interest in those areas, and it didn't always. I started out having to do some other types of things, only because when I got out of law school in '93, the world hadn't caught up yet, and the dollars weren't there in the internet, and you guys remember that. A lot of young people I talked to about that, they don't understand what I'm saying when I said, well, there was no money in internet yet. There wasn't even internet yet, to speak of. But when the industry caught up, I was able to really transition full time into digital issues and technology issues. And it's been great. I've really enjoyed focusing that area.
People actually look at me funny when I tell them that in 2000, the internet went away, that it had just been a fad, that nobody thought they were going to do anything with it anymore. But we actually had the dot-com bust, and that actually was the attitude of some people back then.
Yeah.
Of course, it came back with a big blast. And I remember prior to the dot-com bust, you would buy, there was a magazine called Industry Standard that covered the internet, and it would be like this thick, with content and ads.
Yeah.
So it was a big deal back then, and then it kind of went away, and now it's back to the extent that everybody's on the internet now. Everybody has an account of one kind or another, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost to the point where it's so ubiquitous, we don't talk about it as the internet a whole lot anymore. I've been noticing, just kind of from a meta perspective, that more and more parts of the net are not talked about as being parts of the net, and when I'm powering up my streaming video player to watch Netflix, I don't probably think about these days the fact that I'm using the internet, It's plumbing, in a lot of ways for a lot of things, and that's a really interesting development. There was that time when it was a very conscious decision. I'm not on the net, and now I'm going to go get on the net, and I would log in, but I'm walking around with my phone and my watch and who knows what other devices. I'm kind of on all the time.
Yeah, everything's connected. It's kind of like when you take a trip, you don't talk a lot about the roads and you don't talk a lot about your car. You talk about where you're going and what you're doing there.
It's become infrastructure in a lot of ways, which is interesting. And by the way, I think some of the continuing disputes have gotten tricky as that's the case. If you want to get topical for a minute, we had a wonderful decision from Judge Pittman here in Austin, came out last week or maybe the week before, talking about the unconstitutionality of the social media bill that the Texas legislature passed, and then Governor Abbott signed into law, which gave people all kinds of new remedies against social media platforms for banning them or censoring them, all this kind of stuff. And Pittman did a good point of kind of saying, lest we forget, these are they're not plumbing, they're not infrastructure. Facebook is not, a public thing. It's not it's not a carrier that, the way the roads are or whatever. It's a part of the media, and we don't like to think about it like that because it's so background now for Facebook or Twitter or whatever. But I think all you have to do is look a little bit and see things like Parler come up, which clearly had a political viewpoint, right? I mean, that was set up to represent the views of a certain segment. And while some of the behemoth social media players we're used to try to stay away from saying they're that, they still get all the protections of that, right? They can censor and they can cut out and they can say who can talk and who can't. And that's disturbing to some people, but it's fundamental to the First Amendment, the same way the New York Times can say what we're going to write about,
and I think it's kind of weird to think that the government that there should be legislation of some kind, and that the government should be involved in saying what private companies can or can't publish.
Well, I think the Constitution pretty clearly says the government can't do that, and it is only when you start thinking them not as First Amendment protected media, but as like they're plumbing, like they're like common carriers, and the government says, well, everyone, you need to never take anyone offline based on their content, or you can't ban people for what they say. The funny thing is, if you remember, John, when we first started looking at this, I think everyone's biggest concern was the government would come in and actually be, quote, traditionally conservative about it and say, oh my gosh, there's so much weird stuff going on out there that we're going to say you have to, keep it clean, right? Like the airwaves.
Cyber porn, yeah.
Right. Oh, there was this, one of the horsemen of the cyber apocalypse was porn, right? And it was going to be like, oh, and I think we were all worried the government was going to come in and say, don't carry this, don't carry that, and don't allow this kind of aberrant discussion. And someone wants to talk about their weird ideas, shut them down. Well, weirdly, where we ended up with, at least in Texas, the government coming in and saying, let the weirdos talk. And if you don't, if you censor them, they should be able to sue you. And so it's kind of funny, I guess. Censorship's in the eye of the beholder a little bit, So.
Well, the whole idea of regulation, as far as the social media companies are concerned, one important part of it is people are looking at it in terms of monopolies, antitrust, suits that have been filed in many countries.
Yep.
Do you see that as censorship or as legitimate regulation?
Well, I think you're right on spot bringing that up, because I think that this is the concern that causes people to say, maybe we should be treating Twitter and Facebook and Instagram / Facebook, I guess Meta now, we should be treating them with different rules than we do a newspaper, because they're so monopolistic, they're so huge, they're so overwhelming. And one of the theories that always comes up in this discussion is kind of what we learned to call network effects when we're talking about operating systems, which is, you become the dominant player and it becomes exceedingly hard to unseat you, right? Because everyone's writing apps for that and everyone's adopted it. And, hey, I hold your hand up saying I got a new operating system. You start from scratch and the odds are against you. And the same concept with social media, everyone and their grandmother's on Facebook, and the concept being that it's not easy to start the next Facebook because there's no one there when the first user signs on. It has no value. It only has value as people join up and they're already invested. But the reality is, and so the argument, I think, keep that going, is because these guys are monopolies that way and no one else can compete, then we should not allow them to function as an independent voice. We should make them honor all voices. And if a guy gets on there and is ranting and raving about crazy, Pizzagate or something, they can't shut that down because that would be unfair. The problem with that argument, I think, is that it first of all denies the reality that as big and as powerful as they seem to be right now, those mighty can fall really quick. And in fact, the history of the net's full of once dominant platforms. If you remember MySpace or AOL or CompuServe, or we could go through the list of places where everyone thought, oh, they'll never get replaced, and they do get replaced. And so it really does drive home the fact that they are independent players, and that and so I think it's a dangerous trend. We almost got there in broadcast media, by the way. If you want to get historical about it, when the airwaves were limited, the government started saying to the broadcasters, hey, you can't just represent one point of view because we don't have enough space to allow other people to get their aberrant point of view. So we had like the fairness doctrine. You recall that?
Oh yeah.
You remember someone get up and make a political statement on one side, and then you'd have to force someone, on the other side to have the amount of time. The internet got us away from that because we don't have limited bandwidth anymore. So, it's not like there's only so much space on the shelf. There's as much space as you can imagine. And so anyone can speak. But if, and that's a good thing, because otherwise, our curated experience on the internet would be a bummer. You'd go look for interesting things to you and you'd be forced to read stuff from the other side. Or now I'll put aside for a minute whether this is socially good or bad for society, the fact that we can curate so specifically and get only what we want. But the reality is, it's definitely got effect. But the reality is that that was the argument of the antitrust. That's kind of the antitrust argument, that you're so big, you have to let everyone on. And I think that's a mistaken argument. Ultimately, I do like, you have to be competitive, but I don't think it has to be that you lose your First Amendment rights because you're a big player.
Well, Facebook has, in effect, a monopoly. Just speaking of Facebook as an example, the nature of their monopoly, as you say, is in network effect, and it's because they have data and accounts for just about everybody. And the network effect basically says that when the more people you get into a particular system, the more valuable it is.
Yeah.
And the more valuable it is to each user, because each user has access to like everybody there. It's sort of like faxes are not that useful if four guys have a fax, but if faxes proliferate as they did at one time, then you have this network effect. And one way to deal with that problem of monopoly, to the extent that monopoly is in ownership of accounts and data, or at least in effect ownership, would be to make those accounts and that data available to other comers. That's where Cory Doctorow uses the term adversarial interoperability.
Yep.
In effect, it would be like creating a way for other systems to interact or interoperate with the data that Facebook has. So if you have a Facebook account, you have access to its competitors as well, and they have access to the same data.
Yeah, it's on a much, and I'm a huge believer in that idea too. I think that's how you solve the antitrust issue without messing with free speech. You don't have to start telling them what people can say and can't say on their system. If you address the fact that they may have monopolies by by forcing interoperability. And we did this with the phone system, right? Number portability was a thing. You remember, people used to be locked on a carrier because you didn't want to change phone numbers. You remember that? And it would be a big pain to say, oh man, if I switch to a new carrier, I'm gonna have to get a new number. And we regulated that and said, no, if you switch, you get to take your number with you. And I could see very similar things in social media that I could push a button and say, I'm starting an account on this new system, populate it with all my stuff from my old system. Because here's the thing, it's all your stuff anyway. I mean, the fact that they happen to be on their server, they're not doing you any favor by holding it there. They're making plenty of money by hosting your content, but it's still your content, And the fact that it's not easy to pull it out and put it on a different platform it's an issue. I think it is anti-competitive ultimately. I think it would be nice to be able to say, I'm going to go somewhere else, but I want to see the news stream from Facebook as part of my experience there, so I don't miss my grandparents' pictures, or the grandparents don't miss the kids' pictures. But I'm only seeing parts. I think ultimately there would be a really nice solution there that's a technical one that would allow for other types of platforms with other policies or other viewpoints to have a shot. I hope we do.
There's a bit that I've read about through EFF about people filing suits trying to get an ability to control internet intermediaries violations of a person's right to publicity. And I'm not real clear on how that differs from censorship.
Yeah, the right of publicity is a state law, right, that exists in most states, California having the most developed one, which basically creates and I'm going to use some vague language here, and the lawyers who listen might cringe a little bit. It's almost like a property right in your likeness, in yourself. And of course, you think about why a state like California would have a very strong doctrine here. It's for celebrities, right? It's what keeps me from saying, well, I got a new breakfast here. I'll just put Michael Phelps' picture, that I snapped at the pool the other day or at the Olympics, put it on the front of my breakfast box, and everyone's going to think he's endorsed that product. Well, you can't do that legally now. And by the way, the reason we need that rule is because it might not be a copyright violation. If I'm the photographer of the picture, he doesn't own the copyright in the picture, I do. And so the question is, what's left them to keep me from doing what I just did? And the answer, the gap filler there, is the right of publicity, right? Well, there are some arguments that are made occasionally that, in fact, the social media platforms are really benefiting off of all of our likenesses without compensating us by, having a place where you can go look at my photo and my pictures and if you look at it through that lens, it's not all that different than putting Michael Phelps' picture on a box of cereal. I mean, Facebook's got my picture on their service, and I'm not getting compensated for that. It's an interesting argument. I think it raises some interesting points. I think at its core, the flaw, of course, is that generally speaking, most of us have voluntarily put that material there, and which makes it hard to complain about. And their terms are pretty clear that you waive your rights in that respect. And then the other thing we have to worry about is, if the right publicity goes too far, celebrities could, for example, sue magazines and newspapers that take pictures of them for news purposes, and we don't allow that, right? Because that would stifle the First Amendment. They would love to be able to keep paparazzi photos from showing up in People magazine, but they can't, right? There's a fine line between people using their photo on the cover of a news publication and, the cereal guys putting a photo on the cover of a cereal box, but there is a line. We don't allow you to do one without permission, and we allow you the other. And the question is, where do social media platforms fall in that spectrum? I personally think they're probably a lot closer to a magazine than they are a box of cereal, although that may be up for debate.
Well, how do you determine who has a right of publicity?
We all do.
Is it only famous folks or the lowest common denominator?
We all have it. If I were to take John L's picture and use it on a billboard, without compensating him. He could sue me in Texas and pretty much every state for using his likeness for commercial purposes without permission. And it happens, by the way, it happens all the time. People, don't realize that they need to get that permission, and they put someone in an advertisement that don't pay them, and they get sued. The question is whether Facebook's doing the same thing by having all of our pictures on their site, right? Is that in fact the same thing, or is that more news? And because the news, if the Statesman takes John's picture because he's at a rally and they put him on the cover, say, big rally downtown, he can't sue them for that. There's no compensation required for news usage. There is for commercial endorsement usage. And so, what is social media? I'm not sure, but my personal point of view is it's probably more like news usage, and you can't get compensation from social media sites posting your photos. But it gets tricky that, you look at Instagram, a commercial account on Instagram where, if I'm driving down the street in my Jeep Wrangler, and a Jeep employee takes a photo of me and puts it on their Instagram feed, sure feels like advertising at that point, right? And maybe there is something there.
There's a good question about like who actually owns your Facebook account. I mean, you think of yourself as having the account. It's my account. I put my pictures there and I own those pictures. I put my words there and I own those words, though I assume I haven't taken a couple of weeks to read the contract that I've signed with Facebook, but we sign these contracts of adhesion that supposedly give them some rights in our data. And it occurs to me to ask, like, what's the state of thinking about contracts of adhesion like that?
Yeah, well, contracts of adhesion make the world go round, unfortunately. Without adhesion contracts, commerce grinds to a halt. But for those who aren't familiar, an adhesion contract is basically a general mass contract that you enter into seamlessly without having to necessarily sign anything, they're never negotiated, right? We all do them all the time. If you go rent a car, there's an adhesion contract. You walk into a baseball game, there may be an adhesion contract when they have the sign up say, foul balls are flying around, sit here at your own risk, right? They're all over the place, but they really are all over the place online. Every website you visit has a terms of use associated with it. You probably haven't read any of them, but yet you are subject to those terms automatically through the process of using the site. That's an adhesion. They call it an adhesion contract because the contract kind of sticks to you without you even knowing it. It's like
if you read all the contracts that you signed or agreed to, when would you have time for anything else?
Well, this is my point: is that it would grind commerce to a halt. People would. But by the way, there are unspoken adhesion contracts when you go down to the corner store and buy a can of Diet Coke. There's a contract happens there too. It's just we're not signing it, we're not reading it. But if in fact you hand over the money and they don't give you the Coke, they've broken a contract with you. They owe you that Coke. And so they happen everywhere. Unfortunately, with the internet, they are. It's easy to produce a very long written one in a way that doesn't interfere with the experience because the courts have blessed what we call browser wrap. It used to be, you remember, shrink wrap contracts for software. Like, when you open the shrink wrap, you agree to all the terms that were inside the box, which is a little backwards. Well, the courts, lawyers have called this browser wrap or click wrap on the internet. It's like you don't read the thing, you just click somewhere, or maybe you don't even click. It's just there in your browser, and they can be very detailed. Now, there's some good news on adhesion contracts. So number one, they're enforceable. I mean, that the general rule is, barring something real tricky, the website, when you go on Facebook, you're governed by the Facebook terms. Now, courts will sometimes say, given that this is an adhesion contract, if the terms are unreasonable or worse, unconscionable, they are suspect and maybe not enforceable. So, for example, if Facebook tomorrow were to change their contract, say, on your next login, you owe Mark Zuckerberg $10,000, right? And then we all blindly go log into Facebook, and they say, aha, You agreed $10,000, pay up. That almost certainly is an unconscionable term. Courts would say, no one knew that was there. It's not something you would expect to be there. It's unfair. You got to make it more clear than that. And we're not going to enforce that. But that's an easy one, right? Below that, when you start getting into the details like rights to your data and stuff, it's not clear where any of that stuff raises the level of unconscionability, and people promoting these adhesion contracts have a lot of latitude. I'll give you an example. There's case law that says that in these adhesion contracts, you can agree that you will never bring a class action suit. And that's pretty enforceable. The cases have developed that. In fact, probably most of the online social media contracts you enter into, unbeknownst to you, have you opting out of your class action lawsuit rights, and the courts have upheld that. So adhesion contracts are alive and well. Crazy, unfair terms are suspect, but as you get down into the nitty gritty, there's a lot of stuff they can do. And one of them is this issue about, getting all these permissions to use your data, which you voluntarily are shooting up there. So.
Well, speaking of internet contracts, joining things on the internet, and there's been a lot of noise lately about what they call click to join, call to cancel, and that sounds like something that really does need to be fixed, because I've been sucked into those things where I'll click on something. Oh, that's great. I want to check it out. And I want to find out that it's useless or it's irritating or I don't agree with it. I want to get out of it. And you can only get out and have them stop notifying you and contacting you. You have to call someone.
Yeah, it's crazy. And we got to fix that. I am all for consumer protection regulation on the internet. Up until the point of where it might affect the free speech rights that keep the internet valuable, and that kind of stuff doesn't affect free speech rights at all, right? That's just curing a somewhat predatory business practice that should be dealt with. The spam law, can't spam, for example, which said they need to put an unsubscribe link at the bottom of every email you get so you can get off lists easily, is a version of a law just like what you're talking about and we need, that I think probably did some good, and in fact I'm for more of those, to be honest with you. I think that hell, I've signed up for some services on the internet that for the life of me I can't figure out how to cancel. I've been paying X dollars a month longer than I meant to, only because cancellation was, signing up's real easy, canceling's real hard, and that's got to be fixed. I mean, I think that's there are people that are taken advantage of by those processes. I read somewhere not long ago that there was some ridiculous percentage of Americans are paying monthly subscriptions to services they don't use. Well, that's real hard-earned money going to waste, and I'm all for it. It should be easy to get out of that. So those types of things, I think we constantly need to be on top of. I think we need to be fixing those things all the time. I think we need to be making everything more transparent when it comes to money and privacy and everything else, up to the point of, messing with free speech and some of the liberties we have online. And that's where I think we have to be real careful.
So people are now talking about the metaverse, which is, I assume what they're talking about is a kind of virtual reality. Apparently, Facebook wants to bring you into some kind of VR environment. What impact? What are the legal issues of a so-called metaverse?
So I've been real focused on this question for a little bit, John, and I find it to be one of the more fascinating ones. And so I'll try to keep my answer brief, and then we can dig in. But I think that there's an interesting thing that happens when you create increasingly realistic places. And I'm going to use air quotes for that, because they're clearly not places, but they're virtual places, right? Where people can have very increasingly normal interactions with each other. We know that if you and I meet on the corner, we can transact business, we can talk, we can do all these things in the real world, right? And as we emulate street corners and shopping malls and things in more and more realistic environments like that, there's a fundamental question we have to ask, which is, are we just going to say the rules from this world just port right over, right? And what you can do here, you can do there. What you can't do here, you can't. And in one sense, that seems like, well, of course. I mean, if I defraud you in the real world, hey, I've got oceanfront property for sale and it's swampland, I take your money, that should be wrong. You should have, you should be able to sue me for fraud. It seems to me that at some level, we should carry those rules right over to virtual worlds too. If you defraud me in a virtual world, and I lose virtual money that has real value to me, maybe that should be a problem. What's fascinating is that it kind of starts breaking down when you think about it, though, because in fact, virtual worlds and real worlds are not the same. They're different. And when you get to those differences, it, for example, makes it harder to bring the same rules over. So, for example, if my avatar assaults your avatar in a virtual world, it doesn't feel normal to me to say we treat that with the same assault law we do if I punch you in the face on the street corner, right? It's not the same thing. And so I shouldn't, and so maybe all physical crimes are out, right? And you start getting into identifying those differences and saying, do we need different rules? Because, you remember, was it Jonathan Dibble's Rape in Cyberspace article way back when? He explored this issue.
There's Julian DeBell.
Julian, yeah, right.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that same case.
Yeah, I mean, this was a person who felt their virtual avatar was at least abused, verbally and with descriptions of the assault, but there was no real assault. I say that maybe I'm stating a conclusion that's not a given.
The reality that they were in was compelling enough for them that it didn't occur to them to just get up and walk away from the machine, apparently, or switch it off or something like that.
Yeah.
And that was what kind of fascinated me about that case, just the fact that a person would feel violated to the extent that they apparently did by something that happened in an insubstantial space,
Yeah, and so I think those are the interesting questions. Is how do we port the rules over? It gets really fascinating, and this is an area I focused a lot on in a course I'm teaching at the law school at UT Law on video game law. Is the earliest incarnations of these metaverses and the best ones, most highly populated ones, are game environments. They're not you look at what's going on in some of these MMO games where millions of people are interacting, and there the interactions are game interaction. It changes things a little bit if we're playing a game, where your character is a thief and your game role is to try to steal things from people. Even if those things have real world translatable value, I'm not sure we should call what you did theft in terms of going down to the DA and reporting you and saying, well, John's thief character in this fantasy game stole my shield, and that shield's worth $100 on eBay. I want him put in jail in the real world for that. It starts creating some real fuzzy, weird lines about are you changing the rules when you go into these systems? And I think we're going to have to face that in the metaverse quite a bit.
Well, you're talking about gaming. Do you think there's a possibility of some of these gaming companies are behaving somewhat like the old drug dealers did? They know there are people addicted to the online experience of gaming. I know some personally that are that way. And could that be considered, I don't know, a crime, but is that an actionable case if you could prove that they were being vampires really on the
every consumer product, they've got their hold on you. Some of these things actually are addictive, and we continue to allow them to be legal, cigarettes and you name it, right? So I think it's a real interesting question. I don't know that there's a legal consequence for creating a system that's so compelling that it is addictive. And I agree with you, by the way. I think they are addictive. I mean, they can be for some people. People can use those systems so much they ruin their life, right? But I think what the real impact of that being true is that regulators are going to look for ways to deal with that issue, even though it's not currently illegal. I think, I used to say this all the time back in the earliest days of the internet. I'm like, when regulation's coming, how do I know that? It's because you're going to have legislators, representatives and senators whose kids get online. And when they see what happens with their kids online, they're going to say, wait a minute, where's all the regulation that should be here, right? And I think I think as games become more, quote, addictive, as a generation of parents see their kids sucked into those worlds, and those people get to the right age to get into writing laws, I think we got to watch out, because I think someone are going to say, I don't like what that system did to my kid over time. I don't like the fact that the youngsters that I knew were addicted to this stuff. So I can see there could be some reason why some type of regulation may be coming. It's gonna be hard though, because it is not currently illegal to create an addictive service. And I think, you gotta watch out, because those same guys who might want to be sitting up in Congress writing laws about addictive video game services then peel off to play their 13th round of golf this month. And it seems to me that's a pretty addictive activity too, And so I think it's difficult to see how they're going to do it, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see some action on something. We see the self-regulation happening, right? Instagram just announced they're going to put a time limit feature, tells you if you're scrolling too much, and that I think you'll see more and more of that.
Oh, that's funny. I didn't really know about that. The virtual bleeds over into the physical, and you have like, let's say a LARP, a live action role-playing game, where it has a virtual component and a physical component, that sort of thing. And then you have something like QAnon, which is like a LARP that seems to have sort of become real, in people's minds, to the extent that they really, there's people sitting in Dallas right now waiting for JFK to show up. Yeah. So I can imagine that there will be some kind of weird legal issues that are related to the sort of blurring of the virtual and the physical.
Well, every time technology enables human activity that wasn't enabled before, the law has to catch up, right? And when you have these blends like you're talking about, John, with online communities that move, the reason those are challenging to us, because there's always been groups of crazies, right, in the real world. There were in the 1800s and the 1700s before that, but they didn't have some of the tools that the technology gives them. They didn't have the tool of amplifying their message worldwide at no cost, to find other like-minded, sympathetic crazies, they didn't have the tool of eliminating the barriers of geography, right, where they could do what we're doing right now in a way that they couldn't do before. And so this is what I think causes people's eyebrows to raise a little bit. It's like, wait a minute, things that we used to were self-contained by physics and the laws of nature and just reality. You couldn't bring 10,000 people together if they lived in 10,000 different places. Technologies enable that, and the law may not be nuanced enough to deal with that. It's like,
how about laws related to robotics?
I think a similar thing, right? I mean, we current legal status, by the way, there's no ethical or legal problem doing anything to a machine that you own, right? I mean, it would even seem weird to me, like, I pick up my cell phone and say, you know what, I'm sick of this guy, and I hit it with a hammer and break it. None of us would ever think I should be in trouble for that. But as we get to artificial intelligence and we get to other things, those norms and standards might change. What if we say, wait a minute, that machine meant something to people, or related to people, or the machine had enough sentience that, like a dog, it's cruel to kill it for no reason, I think we're going to have to, all that's coming up. I think, we're going to have to really, not to mention the issue that Asimov wrote about forever and ever ago, which is who's responsible for bad acts by robotic figures. We're seeing that now. I looked out my window right behind me the other day to see, the little driverless drone vehicle cruising along the road, probably taking pizza to someone or something. It was going fast enough that a kid jumped out in front of it. It might have, it might have hurt them. And the question is, who's responsible when that thing does that? So I think we've got a lot of those type of issues coming up.
One area where the law is having trouble getting a grasp on things is cryptocurrency. Where do you think that is headed?
I tell you how you start realizing you're getting up there in age is when the newest and greatest trends pass you up before you even know what's going on with them. And for a long time, I spent a long time struggling to wrap my arms around the excitement that people had about blockchain, about cryptocurrency, about NFTs now, and part of that, is because I think that people like to get excited about some of these things that don't always have the groundbreaking, earth-shattering change associated with them that they thought they were going to. There's hype, right? But this is when I think the fundamentals of the blockchain, the fundamentals of alternative currencies powered by the blockchain, I think are pretty significant developments. I think that there is still a lot of hype. I think that a lot of cryptocurrency excitement is not too distinguishable to me anyway from playing the lottery. It's a form of speculative gambling with investment dollars. And the fact that and anytime I make this argument to someone who's into it, they try to respond with me by telling me about the success. Oh, well, really? Well, you may think that, but I put in $1,000 in Bitcoin and now it's worth 200,000. Well, that argument doesn't. It's not persuasive to me that it's still not a big meaningless, Ponzi scheme / gambling speculation. I mean, Bernie Madoff made a lot of money on his Ponzi scheme too, right? So that doesn't validate it. In fact, if anything, it may help prove the point. I don't know that I fully see the speculative stuff going on in crypto in a way that makes any sense to me, and that in a way that would give me any comfort that it isn't all going to crash to the ground at some point.
Well, not much else is really happening with it. I mean, you hear a lot of talk about the possibilities of using the blockchain and so forth, but really it's just being used for speculation so far.
Certainly the highest attention span stuff's gone is speculation. I think that there are some interesting things. I've got some clients doing some interesting things with security on the blockchain. I've got, I think that it's a core technology that has commercial applicability. But that's apart from the fact that it also powers these speculative investment opportunity things. I mean, NFTs are, my new favorite. I mean, there is so much confusion out there about NFTs and hype and crazy prices associated with them. And I swear to you, I don't think most people understand even what it is you buy when you buy an NFT,
I found a way to explain that. An artist may get a bunch of prints of something they've created, and then they go through and sign and number the prints. That's kind of what NFTs are like.
Yeah, that's a great way, John. Mine, and by the way, I think it requires these kind of analogies. Mine, I like that I've used successfully is like stadium naming rights. If you think about Jerry Jones builds that big old stadium up there, and then he puts up for sale this other right, which is not ownership of the stadium. It's just the ability to claim that you are the sponsor of it, right? AT&T pays $1 bajillion. And now that is AT&T Stadium, but they don't own the stadium. They don't get rent from the stadium. They can't sell it. They have the exclusive non-fungible right to have their name on it. And that's what I think, a lot of the NFT thing is actually doing, but people don't understand that. They think that somehow
Isn't that how Trump makes his money? By just putting his name on things? Isn't that how Trump makes his money? By putting his name on things?
Branding, right? It's exactly. It's flat out branding. And I think that it doesn't feel so great if you're saying, hey, I'm buying this NFT of this, whatever it is, digital piece of art or highlight from the NBA season, whatever, to know all you're doing really is saying, I want my name associated with that. Maybe that's enough for some people, right? But you're not buying it in any other way.
Yeah, John mentioned Trump. What about Trump's planned social media site? Is this going to be an actual site, or is this going to be another Trump University scam?
You want my guess? I mean, just like everything else, all bullshit. I mean, he doesn't seem to execute on anything. It all seems to be a way to raise a bunch of money. But I do believe. I mean, maybe it will be his, or maybe it'll be someone else's. I don't know. I do believe we are going to see the emergence of more thematic, focused, partisan type platforms. I think it's just a natural function of our divided, state of affairs, is that people are going to, and they already try to do it within the current platforms. They try to block people who don't agree with them and, want their feed to only have stuff they like. And then eventually I think people are going to say, well, why not just go to a platform that only has that stuff? Again, I'm not sure that's good for us, but I think that's coming.
There was an interesting legal issue that the Trump people got into when they built their first social media platform, and they used a piece of open source software, Mastodon, and then they didn't release the modifications they made.
That's right.
As you're supposed to do. So Mastodon put them on notice for that. I don't know whatever became of that. Do you have any idea?
I never saw how that resolved either. I did see that they probably engineered around it. I mean, but it was as funny as that was, and I tweeted about it too. But the reality is, it's a pretty common mistake out in the open source community. Good companies do it too. Lots of folks, and usually you can resolve it pretty quickly. It was fun to poke fun of those guys because I think they are probably more incompetent than the average bear trying to do something like that. And so, but it was more of a novelty story, I think, than anything else. Now I will say this: I don't have any faith that they're going to build, if they do build a system, that it will be a secure or a safe one, that it will guard your privacy right. You say what you want about issues with our current platforms. There's some really smart people working at Google and Amazon and Facebook and Twitter, and at least some of those things are being done relatively well. I have I'm just not so sure. Isn't Devin Nunes going to be involved now running it? I think I saw he was retiring from Congress to maybe take over one of the Trump media properties. It's crazy.
I think the problem is that if you bring people in who can really build sophisticated technologies, they expect you to pay them.
Well, they expect you to pay them.
Into a problem with that, yeah.
Well, even more interesting, John, I think that generally speaking, the people that can build those types of technologies won't rent themselves out to ideological causes they don't agree with.
True.
And that actually becomes a more interesting problem. I mean, it may be that you could not get enough brain power into a Trump social media platform, because there may be that the politics of coders generally would say, look, I don't care what you pay me, I'm not going to go help you build this thing,
Yeah, coders and technology people really do want to be paid, and Trump and his companies have a really bad reputation of saying, well, we don't like it, so you don't get paid. And I see that as being a big problem attracting good talent.
Well, they're also principled. That's the thing, I mean, again, say what you will about the current social media platforms. The people there that I know that work at those places, and we know some of them together, John, are very principled people trying to solve the problem from the inside. And I think that if they believed the problems could not be solved, they would quit. They would no longer work at those companies. They are now they'll be the first to tell you what the challenges are, but I think that they are honest to goodness, good principled people saying, I can make more of a difference inside. I think, you start up a right wing or an alt conservative social media platform, I don't think those people come over. I mean, I don't think they come over to help you moderate and design and develop that system. I think they say, this isn't one I can fix from the inside. You're broken from the outset. And I'm not sure they get off the ground with a critical mass of technologists who will do it, because I think technologists tend to be pretty principled people.
Well, if you go back to the actual creation of the internet that we have now, there was a lot of kind of probably utopian thinking behind that, but they definitely were trying to build something that would be that would be a public good, that would be an ethical framework. They sort of tried to build that into the technology, which has always been a big question about whether a technology can incorporate an ethics or not. But I think it can.
Yeah, I think it's a great. I think there are certainly technologies that feel inherently ethical versus unethical to me. And then there's a lot of technologies that fall in a neutral place where it's really in how you use them. I mean, a photocopy machine, pretty neutral. Doesn't feel real neutral if it's right wing, fascists making, their publication to spread out to the world, but I still think that's a neutral technology. And atomic bomb, it's hard to say. To me, that's a neutral technology. I can.
Well, the nuclear energy part of it. Yeah. I mean, but the idea of just blowing things up is kind of problematic.
Yeah, weapons and bombs. Now I understand all the arguments, and before someone writes me and says you're crazy, you don't understand. Without those, we'd have more crime or more, dictators trying to take over the world and these things. Yeah, maybe. I mean, probably, but you got to weigh that against the suffering that some of those tools create, and at the margins, I'm pretty sure we get rid of automatic weapons and probably be okay.
The atomic bomb doesn't seem to have fixed the problem of dictators.
Yeah, I mean, what problem do you think you solved other than killing a whole bunch of innocent people? So I do think that there are technologies that are inherently ethically challenged. I think there are technologies that are inherently good, medicines, and dare I say it without causing a stir, vaccines and things like that eliminate suffering. Generally, those are good things, or at least they should be viewed as good things.
You mentioned automatic weapons, and that's in the news right now, thanks to our Governor Abbott and California Governor Newsom, and the interesting appropriation of Abbott's anti-abortion measures to do away with automatic weapons and similar devices in California. How realistic is that?
Well, so I have mixed feelings about it. First of all, I think it's clever, and I understand exactly what Newsom and the folks in California are doing, which is, it's kind of the reductio ad absurdum argument approach, right? It's like, the Supreme Court bent over backwards to say, well, this isn't so crazy. Maybe Texas thing is okay, and we're going to let it stand. And they're like, really? Because we don't think you'd be letting the same thing stand on a cause you was not abortion. And we'll put that to the test. I personally have some reservations, though. You're playing with fire a little bit here, because the reality is taking unconstitutional state action and saying, well, but if we let the people enforce it themselves, that's okay, is a bad thing, right? I mean, it would be equally bad in the case of private lawsuits against automatic weapons, if in fact automatic weapons are constitutional. Now, if they're not, I get it, right? But we should be resolving that thing at the constitutionality level. I personally, for example, think that the right to, the right for a woman to have an abortion is a constitutionally established right. The state interferes with it, it's wrong. If individuals interfere with that person's right to do that, it's wrong. And I think that, we need to resolve it at that level, so I understand the tactic that they're using, but I sure would hate to have a Supreme Court say, you know what, okay, you're right there too. We don't have to worry about what states do anymore. Just let people, vigilantism take over, right? And that's in essence what Abbott and his cronies did with this abortion bill. Is like, we can't, make it illegal to have an abortion, but we'll let private citizens sue providers for giving them. And that's the same thing,
Yeah, I mean, it is the same thing. That's the thing I had a little trouble understanding, that somehow this is some kind of workaround, because
it's a trick. It's a clever, not so clever. I think you see it all the time. When you're a lawyer, people come to you and say, well, I've been sued for this, or I've been arrested for this, and you say, well, did you do it? And they say, no, I'm not. I'm innocent, or I'm not. I'm not liable. And then they start creating this crazy reasoning. You're like, come on, you're trying to engineer this rationale, but at the end of the day, you did the wrong thing, and I can't really save you if you did the wrong thing. We're not going to win on technicalities. It happens on TV. It does happen once in a while, but the reality is you do the crime, you're going to do the time. And this is what I feel about with this rule, which is they know that Roe versus Wade said the state can't limit it. And so they thought, aha, we're clever. We're going to turn it over and let people sue. Well, you read the dissents in the recent, Supreme Court ruling. This is ridiculous. Everyone knows what they're doing here. They should, it's a crazy way of circumventing it. It should have been shot down from the beginning. And I don't want it for this. I don't want it for guns. I don't want it for anything else. I want to be able to hold the state accountable for its actions and not let it turn enforcement over to vigilante crazy people and somehow that makes it okay.
We're almost down to the end of our hour, and we didn't really have time to talk about the DMCA, which I really thought we would talk about. Just quickly, do you think the DMCA is going to be challenged or changed in some way?
I think both DMCA and Section 230 are up for. There's just so much political stuff going on those two, and for those people who don't follow along, these are basically safe harbors that allow. Really, they're both about free speech, in essence. They make sure that we aren't holding people responsible for things that they didn't do just because they enable the tools for them. In the case of 230, it's the thing that protects system operators and platforms like Facebook. At least for the copyright part of the DMCA, it protects those folks if people are trading, pirated material around, and the bottom line is, I think both those things have served us so well in the development of the internet in a lot of ways, but now have been scapegoated. And I think that there's going to be intense political pressure. And I think that there are people making this case much more eloquently than I can, but what do you replace them with? If system providers are responsible for what goes on their system unbeknownst to them, what do the systems look like going forward?
Well, that kills social media, right?
Or
pretty much. It becomes publishing. Really, you have to vet everything.
And I'm certain that's not what they want.
Yeah.
Right. It can't be that the people who are upset about, Zuckerberg can't be sued because of what a user says. I don't think that they think the right answer is, well, then let's just let Zuckerberg determine what Facebook's pumping out with, it's a hard issue. So there's a scapegoat needed. But the hard issue, reality of the hard issue is that the internet has empowered individuals in a way that it's hard to get your remedy.
Can't put the genie back in the bottle.
Can't put that genie back in the bottle. No. And attempts to do so are, I think, problematic. So I worry greatly. I worry when I see Section 230 is being attacked by both Democrats and Republicans. And I think that if you don't read, the internet academics out there like Eric and Mike Godwin and some of these guys who are pointing out, it's like, hey, this is really dangerous. We may, we may see legislators just come screw this all up.
Yeah.
So I worry.
We are out of time, and I hope that you'll come back in a month or so, and we'll pick it up again because there's a lot more to talk about.
Didn't even feel like an hour went by. So.
Really, man, it was fast. Well, thanks so much.
You bet. Thanks to both of you for having me. It was a pleasure.
You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. With John Lebkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.